Hopefully this is not too loud. I normally talk with my hands a lot, so it's going to be weird having to hold this microphone. So first and foremost, thank you everyone for attending. I really appreciate it. I'm going to steal a line I heard yesterday. This presentation does not have any AI or ML, so I really appreciate you coming here. But if you do want that, I'm sure Zan can throw a couple buzzwords in towards the end of the presentation. My name is Rich Spera. I'm the Associate Director of Knowledge Enterprise Analytics. Co-presenting with me is Zan Farrer. He's our business intelligence developer. Sorry. So before I get started on our actual presentation, just kind of want to do a quick overview of Knowledge Enterprise Analytics. Our data kind of falls into three buckets. First is what we call our monthly reporting, routine reporting. And this is where we take data from the Workday financial system, our enterprise research administration system, and PeopleSoft. We combine the data. It's highly validated. It goes through an auditing process where we find discrepancies that may have occurred in past months. Hopefully not, but occasionally things can change historically. So we would just want to look into those if something does change. We then publish that data monthly. We send out an email to the university, or really our distribution list, letting people know that the monthly reporting is available. This data is very important to faculty. It's used during the promotion, tenure, and review process. So it looks at proposals, awards, expenditures, and it's one of the things that is considered when faculty are up for promotion, tenure, and review. Next is our custom and ad hoc request. There's a lot that our monthly reporting can answer, but there's even more that it cannot. And so that's where we have these ad hoc requests. Depending on how frequently it comes, the request is asked, we may create a Tableau report, a Power BI report, or if it's something that, once a year occurs, we'll just, have an Excel file where we provide you the Excel file. Last but not least is our strategic analysis. This is where we use third-party tools, and a couple examples of that are Experts, SciVal, and Dimensions. These tools are incredibly powerful. They're using public data. Dimensions, as an example, is a great tool to compare ASU departments, and faculty to other institutions. So if you wanted to see how ASU faculty compared to faculty at, say, Virginia Tech, you can use Dimensions to do that. You wouldn't want to take Dimensions data from Virginia Tech and use our own internal data because you're not using the same stick for measuring. Both SciVal and Dimensions have a lot of publication data as well. So if we wanted to see if faculty are publishing in any high-profile journals, we can use those data sources to see where they're publishing and who's publishing, along with measuring their H-index. Last but not least is Experts. It's able to, air quote, fingerprint here. And by what I mean that is it takes the abstracts from proposals along with the proposal titles, and it determines, based on keywords, what a faculty member's expertise is. And the way you use this tool is then if somebody at ASU needs to find an expert in, say, solar, they can use the expert system to see who at ASU has expertise in a specific field. So if you're trying to find collaborators to work on a proposal, that's how you can use Experts. Now, on to our actual presentation. Facility data, specifically research space. So we're going to approach this couple in a specific order. First being, what was the problem we were trying to solve? How did this all come about? Next was our extract, transform, load process, and then the dashboard visualization, and actually solving the problems that were brought up. So first, senior leadership at KE didn't know how much research space we had or the type of space. They couldn't tell you, did we have 2,000 square feet of research space, 2 million, 200,000? No one really knew without pulling the data, doing a ton of Excel files, pivot tables, hopefully getting the same answer that other people may or may not get. We also didn't know the type of space. So you couldn't go, okay, we have low EMF space in this specific building, or we have a high base space in this building. The people that did know that, it was one of those tribal knowledge where they happened to actually have to be there when a certain piece of equipment was being installed, that, okay, in the biodesign basement, we have a room that's able to hold the CXFEL microscope. They knew it, but it was nowhere in the system at all. Next was where we have people located along with the equipment. Was it optimally placed? If you have a group of faculty members that are using a specific piece of equipment, are they located near it? Or do you have the equipment on Tempe, the faculty members are split between downtown and Poly. They didn't know, so they wanted to find that out. Leadership was also not able to measure the productivity of buildings. And with that, it's, I want to caution, the measuring productivity here, because there's a lot of ways you can measure productivity. And at KE, one of the main metrics we use is, it's research, so we're looking at dollars per square foot. It could be proposal dollars, which is where you're asking for money. It could be awards, where you've actually received the money, or it could be expenditures, where you're spending the money. Are those all the true measure of what a building does? Probably not. So, it's just one data point amongst many that you can use to measure the productivity of data of a building. So when we do meet with the steering group for this project, that's one of the things we mention often is, you don't want to be comparing Biodesign B to a building in the Art College or Herberger, because it's not a true apples to apples. I wouldn't even really compare Biodesign B to Biodesign A, even though they're both pretty much, they're connected to each other, but it's still not, a true actual comparison. You could measure the faculty or units in a specific building to see who has how much space, how are they utilizing their space. But even then, it's just caution that it is not the only metric of a building. So it's just, you can use it, you can look at it, but just remember there are other ways. How many students are in the building? How many classrooms? Things of that nature. Those are all things we're not measuring, but they're also very vital to a building. And then actually, before I move on to the next one, also the way we measure productivity, I can't tell you where a lab is actually, what research a lab is actually doing. Sure, we have an award, say from NIH. I can't tell you the work is being done at this specific lab or in this office. I don't know. No one knows besides the faculty member. And since we have, 5,000 faculty members and over 3,000 awards, we're never going to figure out exactly where every piece of their project, the work is occurring at. So the best we can do is to take the total space of units and see how it's distributed amongst buildings. So if, say, we'll just use class as an example. Say they're split 50% between Biodesign B and Biodesign A. We go, okay, these buildings, we're going to split your expenditures or whatever we're measuring, just 50-50, because that's how their space is split. Again, not the best, but that is all we can do, because we have no other way to really discern how a building is or how productive a building is, or where the research is taking place at. Moving on to the next point, our administrative staff needed timely access to the facility data. So if somebody was coming in, they needed an office, they needed a lab space. The old process was they'd reach out to the facility data group, they'd email them, a few days would pass, they'd get a CSV file or Excel file, they would then review it, rinse and repeat every time this process needed to occur. So with our new dashboard, one of the things we're going to solve is they now have access to the data at the tip of their fingertips. So anytime they need to, go find out where we have available space at, they can go to the dashboard. We also wanted to make our space planning process within KE much more transparent. And then last but not least, I mentioned experts before. We wanted to combine the experts' data with our facility data to see where people with expertise were located. And then see, are they near each other? Are they not? So that's one of the things we were hoping to answer. Now on to the actual tools. How did we begin, trying to solve this problem? Now you see there are 4 tools here, and the reason why that is because we're actually migrating to Azure right now, to the cloud from our on-prem SQL Server. So our on-prem server, we're using Microsoft SQL Server Integration Services, Microsoft SQL Server, and Tableau. In the cloud, we're using SQL Server MI, a managed instance, Azure Pipelines, and Tableau. So there's no SSIS in the cloud version. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on the SSIS packages for the on-prem. What we do here is we just copy the ASU facility tables from the Redshift schema. We then truncate our tables on the SQL Server instance, load the data. There's a scheduled task that runs every day and executes this job. And actually, before I go on, if anyone has any questions at any point in time, just feel free to ask. You don't have to wait till the end of the presentation. The Azure pipeline works very similarly to the SQL Server Integration Services, but it's different. ET provides the JSON files of the ASU facility schema to an S3 bucket. We then pull those S3, we then pull the files from the S3 bucket, and we load the data into our SQL Server managed instance in Azure. And we have a trigger that runs on a schedule that executes this pipeline. Now, what that looks like is this. This brings in all of the data from the ASU facility schema, and it loads it to our SQL Server managed instance. This lookup function here, what that does is it's actually querying our managed instance SQL Server. It's finding the tables that we've already created for the facility data, for the facility schema, and it's going, here are the tables I need. There's then hard-coded information from the JSON files that doesn't change, that we've combined with it, basically saying, here's the data you need, and here's what you need to bring from the S3 bucket. So that lookup function then feeds the for each loop, and then within the for each loop, there's a copy data activity. That copy data activity copies the JSON file. There's pre-copy scripts within there, so it will truncate the tables, drop the table, depending on whatever you do. And then the for each loop, it makes it loop. So it loops through it until, or loops through the copy data activity until we've actually completed the, all of the tables being copied. This is all parameterized too, so it's very easy to change if we need to add tables, if we need to remove a table, or even if we need to change this workflow to bring in, say, financial data from the Redshift schema. So onto the SQL. We have a total of 3 stored procedures. The first stored procedure, it builds a table combining all of the ASU facility data together. It basically creates a wide table. I believe ET calls them enriched tables. You can think of it as a 1NF table. Basically, it's much easier for the team to query because they don't have to join all these different data sets together to actually create, the table. So it's there. You just query one table, and then you have all the data you need for the facility information. From there, we then have 2 other stored procedures, which combines our research, the expenditure awards, proposal data, and it combines it with that the previously created facility table, and that's where we get our productivity data. Before I hand this off to Zan, is there any other questions or thoughts, concerns? All right, well, thank you very much. I'm going to hand this to Zan now.
All right, so quick show of hands. How many people have worked on, long-term projects, waterfall, agile methodology, anything like that? Okay, how many of those people have seen scope creep in the projects? Yeah, okay. So scope creep can actually be a good thing sometimes, and it can be a horrible, I don't want to do it thing. We had a little bit of both in this project. So the good scope creep was senior leadership had seen a PowerPoint presentation that delved into specific building utilization. And as we progressed through this project, someone said, hey, that PowerPoint, can we just make that a Tableau dashboard? And I wanted to immediately say no, because I had neither the bandwidth nor the desire to do it. Thankfully, Rich had lots of free time, so he knocked that out, which ultimately then got integrated into my dashboards. And thankfully, Tableau has that little button where it's combine workbooks, nice and easy to do. And that was a great ask, because we didn't have to go through a bunch of iterative, working through, well, what do you want it to look like? Because they'd already seen the PowerPoint. They knew that was the information they wanted. That's the layout they liked. That was everything. So it took out so much of that agile, iterative work. That was a great ask, and then they were very, very happy because they'd already seen that. They knew that's what they liked and they wanted. One of the less good ones that we ended up saying no to was, as part of our process, we had people from core facilities. We had Megan Manley, who is a wonderful person to work with. She sent out surveys ahead of time. What do you want in this dashboard? As we go through and show people it, she's going to send out more surveys and see how we can make it even better in version 2, 3, 4. But one of the people on the team was advocating for faculty members, and specifically they said, as Rich mentioned, with the dollars per square foot is an imperfect metric to say the least. So they said, well, we don't want faculty to feel like they're being judged just on how many dollars they're bringing in per square foot of lab space, because a mechanical engineer is going to need a lot more space than a computer science professor. So they said, well, what if we bring in, how many classes they teach, and maybe how many proposals they have, put out, and it just started adding and adding. Well, we already have dashboards that look at the productivity metrics of faculty members in those types of areas. We send out reports and have those available for tenure review or other such things. So we ultimately said, no, we're not going to do that. That is not at all. This dashboard is about the space utilization. It's not a report card for the faculty. Now we can take some of this information and add it to those report card reports for the faculty if that's what they want. Absolutely, that's not a problem, but it shouldn't go the other way because we already have, I think, 15 different tabs between all the different dashboards. We don't need to add even more superfluous information. So with scope creep, sometimes you got to say yes, sometimes you got to say no. Number two, I won't lie, number two hurts my pride a little bit. So we were talking about how we wanted to show room attributes, the low EMF, high bay, equipment in the room, electron microscopes or, electrophoresis, whatever professors need. In our initial demo dashboard, that was just a complete mock-up, using all fictitious data. We had that in there because we thought we could access it. Well, it turns out that information it's in a spreadsheet that someone has on their personal laptop. It's the core facilities person who's been here for 20 years and just knows everything. They have that in there. So Megan Manley is leading the effort to try to gather more information and become available. So hopefully that'll be on version 2, 3, or 4 where we can have those. But the reason that hurts my pride so much was that was one of our promises or initial intents was, hey, you want this information, we'll provide it for you. And then we had to come back 6 months later, tail between our legs, saying, actually, no one has that. We don't know where it is. We probably can't do that. So one, cautionary tale to try to learn a little ahead of time what's available. And then two, sometimes you just can't do certain things, or at least not right now. All right, number 3. So before we did this, core facilities or whoever's in charge, they use this information, but not a lot of other people did. It wasn't information that required transparency as much, so it wasn't information that was updated very often. It's updated about once a year, is that right, Rich? Yeah, once a year at minimum. That was the benchmark they set, because if no one's really looking at it that often, it doesn't make any difference. Well, that changes radically when you have a dashboard that's designed for senior leadership's assistants who are then going to give reports to senior leadership about it. So now all of a sudden that process has to radically change. And again, I keep mentioning her because she's awesome. Megan Manley is leading the effort on that to try to streamline that process. I would love it to be updated daily, but monthly or quarterly is probably where we're actually going to land. We found this out because when I made one of the versions of this dashboard, I found myself located in the graduate college where I haven't worked for a year and change. That's when we discovered it was out of date. And in true programmer fashion, we said, oh, that's not a bug, that's a feature. I'm showing you how out of date this information is and how we can identify problems and try to fix those. Great line, always use it whenever you can. It's not a bug, it's a feature. Let's see here. Oh, okay. Number 4, so have you ever gotten a table or a data set and it's something you've never worked with before? You have no idea, no context, it's just numbers on a sheet. Well, that's kind of what happened with this one. Built the dashboard, said, okay, no, this building has this many square feet, this building has this many, and one of the people on our meetings that we had regularly was from Core Facilities, Tom Colella, and he looks at it and is like, oh, all of those numbers are wrong. Oh, okay, I have no idea if it's 1 million square feet or 100,000 square feet in a building. I have no context for this data, whereas he's Core Facility and knows everything about this. So I can't recommend enough always making sure you have experts in the new data set. Even if they're not on your, in your immediate department, you can reach out to them and say, hey, I did 1 million billion calculations and here's where I landed. Does this look right? I don't know. If we're talking about, student data, the 4+1 programs, oh yeah, I know like half those numbers off the top of my head. I worked with that data for years. This, brand new. And honestly, no one's really looked at it outside of the facility type of personnel before. So that was a lesson learned there, is always make sure your numbers are right before it gets out too far. Thankfully, he was like second person to look at it, so I didn't feel too bad. All right, so here's an example of one of the visualizations I created. So this one is looking at the room attributes, and as mentioned earlier, we were hoping to get a lot more data into this than we actually did. So the end result was less than I had hoped for, but maybe around 2 or 3 we can get some enrichment in the data. Now, when I first started working in Tableau years ago, I just loved making graphs and pictures and slicing and dicing and just going crazy. And ultimately, probably like 90% of my graphs got thrown out because they weren't useful. Thankfully, these days I've learned a little more. And those items that Rich showed were the questions we're trying to answer. You look at those questions and then you design your graphs. So we're talking about space utilization and are we being efficient about it. So with that in mind, I created this one and another one that's basically identical, except for this one looks at the room attributes and the other one looks at where the people are. So for the room one, we would love to someday have the low bay EMF, the equipment, all that's in it. Currently, one of the main features we have is what's called a PEFI code. And it's what the room is designated to be for. It's classroom space, it's lab space, it's equipment storage, it's whatever. So this gives a quick ability to kind of go through and see where these physical rooms are, and also how much space there is in each of these buildings. Originally, we were looking at just research type space, but someone smarter than me asked the question, well, why can't we just look at all space? It's like, oh, yeah, let me just take that on my where clause and boom, we'll have everything. I make it a filter on my dashboard so whoever needs to use it for whatever purpose can use it. Filters add a lot of functionality to things. I love them, even though sometimes they slow stuff down if you have too many. And then the one with the people, that's where we're looking at that dollars per square foot, how efficient their space is being used, as well as the experts data that Rich mentioned earlier. We have that combined into this. So if you want to see, maybe you want to get all the, entomologists together in one area. The idea being is, you want that cross-pollination, the water cooler talk, maybe new ideas get sparked. Or if you're looking for someone on a collaboration, here's another way to get access to that experts data. And the other thing is, as mentioned, that the dollars per square foot may not always, to be a perfect metric, but when you can filter on college, department, expertise, you as a, maybe not a dean, but a director or mid-level person, you can say, okay, hey, these are the people I can compare because they're in the relatively same field. They should use the relatively same equipment and space. Let me see how they're doing. And if you have one person who is $1 million a square foot and one person who is $1 per square foot, you can see, oh, okay, let's go to the $1 million guy. Let's learn the lessons, get the tips and tricks. What is he doing about his space? Is it just that he's getting a lot more grants? Or are they getting the same number of grants, but this person just is incredibly efficient? And then you can go to the less efficient and pass those lessons on. That was the desired use case, the solution for these types of dashboards. It's not to point out, oh, you're doing bad. It's, hey, how can I help you? But that was also a concern expressed by some of the faculty advocates was, we're not trying to punish the bad people. We're trying to learn lessons from the more successful and pass those along. So this is one of the ones that Rich created that was from that PowerPoint presentation that senior leadership loves so much. The names are blocked out because they determined the financial data was more sensitive. But this is looking at buildings overall, how many dollars per square foot they're bringing in, that's the bars, and then the dot is the target numbers. Because unbeknownst to me, they actually already have these metrics that they want people to meet. We just had no idea if buildings were meeting them at all. So that's what this graph is trying to show at a quick glance. We have the underperforming facilities, which they didn't like that name, we're probably gonna have to change that, and the overperforming facilities. The most interesting part though, at least to me, was this guy right here that looks like it's bringing in absolutely nothing and has one of the highest benchmarks. This served as a great way to demonstrate that this is a bad metric for that building. That building is a recharge center, and it's doing great at that. And it's doing terrible at bringing in money because that's not what it's being used for. Maybe that was the intent at some point along the way, but it's not anymore. So these types of graphs and similar things can be helpful to call out, hey, maybe we should look at other metrics. Maybe we could have, this is a perfectly valid metric in some cases, then add a few more filters so you can change what's being measured versus what the target number is. All right, and finally, again, this is another one from the senior leadership PowerPoint. This is a real deep dive into an individual building, and we're currently building these all out for all the different buildings. But this is from the original mock-up from Rich. So here, you can go into the expenditures, the gross foot, the the lab square footage, the office space, the classrooms, and we want to enrich this more with, how many classes are actually being taught, how many students are attending. And then you can break it down by each department, how much square footage they're getting, how much expenditures they have per building, because there are, people who care about, well, what is the college level doing? What is the department level doing? And people who care a lot about what the building level is doing. And as I was creating these, there are some buildings that have very little research going into it, and that kind of ties back into that bar graph where it shows, hey, maybe these are bad metrics for some buildings. What other metrics are good for those buildings? What is the building trying to actually accomplish? Let's make sure we're measuring that. As you can tell, I'm sorry, I love graphs. I love getting into all this. I find this truly fascinating. But it was a very interesting process going through and seeing, because the more and more you go through, the more questions you have, the more you got to reach out to people and refine it. These types of dashboards is not just, here's a project, I completed the project, okay, boom, I leave, I'm done. It's a product, it's an ongoing one. And as we go through these different iterations, we'll refine it more and more. And then even once we're done, we still have work to do. It becomes technical debt, essentially, because you got to not only maintain these, but then adapt with the times. Maybe new buildings are built that serve an entirely new purpose we've never had before. What kind of metrics do we need to do for these? And I think that's one thing that isn't always taken into consideration when building these types of dashboards, is realizing that you're going to have to maintain this. You have to, occasionally reach out to your stakeholders, make sure it's still serving the purpose that it is. Because if you don't, then one of two things is going to happen. Either they just stop using it because it's no longer relevant, or you're going to get emails from people with titles you don't want to see yelling at you about why is this useless and fix it. I have enough work to do. I don't need to get yelled at anymore. Are there any questions? Yes, sir.
On the revenue versus the goal chart for the buildings,
Yes, sir.
on the far right there's an overperforming facility that looks like it's right on target.
Oh yeah, it's like 101% or 102%. Yeah, like it's just barely over the metric. Yeah. I mean, it looks like a perfectly successful building. That's exactly where we want it to be. Okay. Now, the one that is wildly overperforming, that's the one I have questions about. Is it, they're doing something special there? Is it a bad metric for that, or is it something we can learn lessons from and be like, hey, let's teach everybody else how to do that? Yes, ma'am. Very possibly, yes. Oh, okay, yeah, you guys are cool. Yes, ma'am. Good question. So currently, because we're still in the beta test, literally next week I'm teaching 2 classes to a pre-approved list of people and their assistants. The desired end goal is, so I have 2 sets of dashboards. One that does not have the financial data, and then ones that do. So the ones that do have the financial, that one we're going to be a lot more careful about who we release out to the public. But the ones without financial, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're tending to release that to anybody who wants it, right? Yeah. So hopefully this year, maybe January next year, we should be launching these dashboards. Oh, cool. Yeah, I'm more than happy to. If you guys, want access to our dashboards, email us at KE Analytics, and you can just request access. I was literally granted Edna permissions like last week to do it, so I'm more than happy to give them out. Any other questions I can help answer? Otherwise, what time? Yeah, you guys get to go early. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate you coming.